Today we're working on cabinets. We've been working on these for several days now. If this is the first video you're watching, jump back. We did some work on our Shopsmith. We brought it home from storage. It was in storage for 2 years. We got it all tuned up and running good. So far it's running good. We haven't used all the tools yet, but what we have done has been working great. So if you want to learn more about the Shopsmith that we're using, give those videos a watch. Then the last couple of days have been getting this far on the base cabinet boxes. So we had to spend a day just cutting things up. The reason that took an entire day is because I spent a lot of time designing this set of cabinets in a software called SketchUp. And anyway, there's a bunch of videos out there that kind of explains the design process. And then we transferred those into a spreadsheet so that we had a cut list. And then we transferred the cut list into a software that allows us to optimize the sheets so we don't waste much material, or we just waste less. Anyway, it took a while. So we got all this material cut. And then yesterday, I started working on the pocket hole joinery with our Craig jig. So we use this jig to drill holes in the cabinetry and use that as a method of joining them instead of using glue and dado joints, things like that. So yesterday I didn't get as far as I wanted to get, but we did get these boxes put together. And now we kind of have to shift gears. Before I get too far along, some of you who watched yesterday's video are probably curious what the problem was that we identified yesterday when Alyssa came in and saw the boxes. Well, I thought this piece was milled wrong or cut wrong, and it actually is correct. So why would these pieces then be coming to a peak? The answer is the shelf was too high, but not in the front, it was too high in the back. And I think there's a lesson here that when you put these shelves in like this, you have to block both the front and the back of the cabinet. I did not do that. I only blocked the front, and then I kind of just like made sure it was fit good and I attached it. Well, I got it off by 1/8 of an inch, and that 1/8 of an inch cost me right here. Then the second lesson, you can see that these are still a little bit crooked, and I think the cause of that is now actually the hardware. Because when I put those screws in, the piece was crooked. It kind of wants to stay crooked now, and unfortunately with these screws I don't think there's a lot of room for fixing it. So it's pretty stinking good. If we get to the cabinet install phase and we need to do some adjustments, we can. Definitely learning as we go. So that's what we got done. The lower boxes are basically done, and we need to assemble the upper boxes. But the problem is we can't, because the upper boxes actually have a 1/2 inch back on them, because you'll be able to see in the cabinet. These are a sink base and 2 drawer bases, so you're never really going to look into the back of the cabinet. And the sink base we want open because of the plumbing. So there's no backs on these lower cabinets, so we could just put them together. The upper cabinets though have a back, and they require a dado joint, and that back is made out of 1/2 inch plywood, which we have not cut up yet. So what we need to do today is actually cut up all the 1/2 inch plywood, which is what we're going to be using to build our drawers. And we're going to be using some of that for the backs, the mounting blocks on the back of the cabinets. And we need to mill up the 1/2 inch backs for the upper cabinets. That's all going to be out of our 1/2 inch plywood. We've been trying to reduce the amount of effort needed to complete these cabinets without cutting corners. And one of the things that we did on the 3/4 was we purchased a plywood that was pre-finished on one side, and that just reduces the amount of effort that we needed to put in to get the cabinets usable. Unfortunately, with this 1/2 inch, they did not have anything available that was pre-finished on either side. So this is all unfinished, and so there's going to be a lot of sanding and prep and finishing to get these usable. Something that we've learned kind of in this building process is, while we have this dream of making all the materials ourselves, or as much of them as we can, there's definitely a time and a place to just buy things. There's just products in the modern era that are very difficult to make at home, and there's a reason there's a market for them. They're just superior. Plywood's one of those. It's an engineered product. It's fairly precise and it's consistent, so that's what we're doing. We could build this out of completely different materials. We're not doing that. So the temptation then is to try to do as much of the work like finishing as you can. But you know what? In our situation here, we're working in our garage, which happens to be somewhat of a living space right now. So using paints and lacquers and stuff like that in here is not that desirable. So where we can, if we can, we try to just pay the money and have someone else do that stuff for us, because it doesn't make the cabinet better if we do it. Whereas if we can build the cabinets, that gives us a chance to kind of use our own hands to make something. I lacquered just one side of this piece yesterday, one piece, one side, and it rained while I was doing that, so I got a little bit of water on it, which sucks. So it just kind of reinforces, pick your battles if you're building stuff like this. If you want to build everything from scratch, good luck. But if you can get something that does a little bit of the work for you, yet doesn't cut corners, we feel like that's a good compromise. Another reason I wanted to get the 1/2 inch stuff all cut up first before we do the upper cabinets is we have to set up a dado blade on our saw. And there are some innovations in the dado blade world. We don't have one of those. We have an older shim style dado blade. And when you take the time and effort to get that blade set up, you want to set that blade up one time and do all of your dados. So we could have set the blade up and done the dados on all of the upper cabinets, but then we would have to take that blade back off, put the other blade on, saw the plywood, you get the idea. If we get everything sawn up, and there's no more sawing to do, then we put the dado blade on. We should be able to run everything through the exact same dado, and that will make life super easy. I assume everybody knows what a dado blade is, and of course we're going to show this later, but this is actually a dado blade set. And what it is multiple blades, and what you do is stack them on the table saw, and the net effect is that you end up with a joint that can either be a rabbet joint or what's called a dado. So a dado would be if we removed, say, this piece of wood right here in a slot, and then what happens is the piece of wood that we want to join actually slides into that slot, and then we can either screw it or glue it or both, and it makes a fairly strong joint, but it transfers the load down into the wood like this, instead of just resting on, say, the screws or hardware. If you haven't seen the videos where we build our wood-fired hot tub, give those a watch. The bottom of the floor of that hot tub has a dado joint in it, and that's how the floor holds that weight, is through that dado joint. And with that type of application, I guess with any application, it's extremely important that it be very precise, that it fit tightly. If it doesn't fit tight, it's just, you might as well not even dado at all. Part of the strength of the joint comes from the tightness with which they fit together. So like the other day when we started cutting, we have a cut sheet for our 1/2 inch material. I actually went back through this again because I was scared to death that I screwed this one up. But obviously yesterday we put these boxes together with good success. We only had one verifiable mistake. So we're going to do the same thing with our 1/2 inch. I've taken the time to create a cut sheet for each of the pieces. And same thing on this guy. We ended up doing some musical parts. We moved some of these to a different sheet because just because this software makes it efficient, meaning it maximizes the material, that doesn't mean it makes it easy to cut. And so if you just kind of use your brain a little bit, you can kind of deduce that if you move pieces around just a hair, your job gets easier and you don't waste material. So we're going to do a little bit of that with our 1/2 inch today. I'm going to take some time here, just make some quick notes on moving some things around, and then we should be able to start cutting. And here's hoping today goes smoothly. Well, we averted our first disaster of the day. I was looking at these cut sheets trying to think about how to set up the table saw, and I realized that the software was making my life harder. I've drawn arrows here that represent the wood grain in the finished cabinet. If you look carefully, for example, this piece of wood and this piece of wood are backs for the same cabinet, but look how the software turned this piece of wood to be more efficient. The net effect would be we would have a cabinet with grains going two different directions. So if you were looking at the cabinet like this, let's see, this piece would have grain going this direction and this piece would have grain going this direction. I don't think visually that's going to be great, and that's just one more level to this process. So what I did was I went back through and I set grain preferences for each one of those pieces and generated a new set of cut sheets. So now For example, these two pieces are the pieces that I showed you just a second ago, and you can see that they're now going the same direction with the grain. And same thing with 109 and 147. I knew that this was something that you really had to think about. I thought that the software probably would just work out, and the answer is it did not. So hopefully we don't have any of those issues today. We'll find out as we start cutting. The last time, kind of cutting these into splits made sense, so let's cut right through there. We have all these 2 inchers down here that are gonna kibosh our plan. Kind of looks like if we cut through here, that works. I guess if we're just gonna scrap that, we could cut here, and then I guess we're down to cross-cutting there. Then we can start to rip all of these 21s. So it seems like we're kind of stuck at cross-cutting there. And then this one, there's just the one cut 12 3/8. Little time here while I'm waiting for some help to push sheets through the saw. So I'm gonna get this Dado blade set up. Basically what it comes with is a front and a back blade. So these blades are basically reverses of each other. They get stacked with the teeth opposite, something like that. And then if we look at this depth gauge, here we go. It tells us that if we want a 1/2 inch Dado, that we need to use blades A and B, and then we need to use 2 of the D chipper blades. So these chipper blades that are included, you basically stack them to change the thickness of your Dado stack. And they're different thicknesses. So 4 of them are this thickness, and then they include one that's a little bit thinner. And in some fashion or another, the combination of all these pieces and some shims will get you, in theory, what you want. Of course, your Dado may not be a true 1/2 inch. I mean, it really depends on the thickness of your material. I really hope we don't have to use any shims. So if we stack these chippers, so something like that, and then we could put this one over here, and then this blade. In theory, that gives us a 1/2 inch Dado. The other challenge is I think most are probably not set up for a Dado blade. So the arbor that this blade attaches to is quite a bit longer than a normal saw arbor. You just wouldn't need all this spinning mass and stuff hanging out there. So this is a 5/8 inch accessory arbor from Shopsmith that allows us to use molder and Dado blades, and it looks like there's kind of a series of spacers and whatnot that we could use to kind of align this on the arbor. I feel like setting up a Dado blade is just an act of patience. You have to use these 2, this one and this one, and this one is optional. And then let's start stacking our Dado blade. Pretty easy to start getting that backwards. I don't know if it's better to put them between the teeth. That's probably better there. And then let's put this one kind of opposite that. And we just want to make sure that none of the teeth are intersecting each other. Put that nut on, washer on. Maybe there's one nice thing about the Shopsmith in that this is all built onto a separate arbor. So we can basically leave that assembled unless we needed to change it. A normal table saw, you'd have to take the blade off, assuming you have an arbor on there that'll fit the Dado blade, then build the Dado blade, take the Dado blade off, etc., etc. But the nice thing about the Shopsmith is that everything's built on its own arbor, so we can just remove this arbor and then put this arbor on, and we can kind of switch back and forth without having to rebuild the Dado blade. cut Bravo 3, so that's going to stay Bravo 3. That's going to become Bravo 4. According to this, we need a strip that's 12 3/8. I don't love the idea of ripping up a whole sheet for that, but according to the software, we don't have an option. Well, I'd like to think I can take it from here, but this 1/2 inch is kind of floppy. So it looks to me like there's a redonkulous amount of 21-inch cross cutting. So I wouldn't mind if I could just have your help for a little bit longer. What that'll do is it'll knock the pieces down. So let me set the saw up for 21, and then basically everything that's in this yellow hatched areas, I kind of sat and thought about what's the most efficient way to go about this. It looks like most of that can be cut to 21 inches. So let's do that. We need kind of a way to put aside resaw stuff. Maybe when a piece is done, just set it on the floor over there maybe. And then anything that needs resawed, put it back up here. Saw is set to 21. Not done. So this should be 42 1/8. Yep. Well, that probably saved me a half an hour of just walking around the stinking table saw.
Right? Yeah, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, thanks for the help. So I will dive into the rest of this mess and hopefully I can still figure it all out.
Yep.
Because we've cut a bunch of stuff off of stuff. I'm sure the guys who do this for a living can tell you the break-even point between labor and material. Labor in most of these businesses is by far your biggest expense. So in the effort to save every last square inch of plywood, are you really losing your shirt on labor? I bet there's a point where this kind of cut sheet almost doesn't make sense. You're better off setting the table saw up and just going to work. And if you have a little bit of scrap left over, oh well. But in this case, we're trying to maximize it. And I can tell you that we're definitely throwing labor at this problem instead of reducing our material costs. Got it done, guys. We got all the cutting done. That was a jigsaw puzzle. And I don't know if it's all gonna fit. We'll have to see. It's not gonna happen today. I'm tired. I can't believe how much cutting that was. Like, it doesn't look that big of a deal on this sheet, but I think in practicum, wow, that's a lot of work. Two things. One, I can now see why cabinet shops use a CNC machine. I get it. This is one man. I've been working at this for about 4.5 hours. No, I'm not a cabinet maker, so somebody could probably double my productivity, especially if they didn't have a shopsmith and they had help. But anyway, I can totally see why they just throw it on a panel CNC machine and bada bing, bada boom, it's done in probably 30 minutes or something. Oh, and it's a lot more accurate, and there's probably a lot less mistakes. So I totally get it. Someone actually messaged us on Instagram and said that there's a CNC, a maker space or something nearby that has a 4x8 CNC machine. I wanted to challenge myself to do this on the saw, but I can see why someone might want to take a panel down there to do it. Or it also crossed my mind to try to contact a cabinet shop with my cut sheet and just see if they could knock it out. But I think that would kind of spoil a little bit of my fun. As hard as this was, I had a little bit of fun doing it. One more thing that is super embarrassingly stupid. This is not even a rookie. I mean, yeah, this is probably a rookie or like a little above mistake. Oh, I can't believe I'm even gonna admit this. So, some of you guys out there might not know that the tip of a tape measure wiggles, and it wiggles the thickness of the latch. The reason for that is when you back it up to something, so when you pull an inside measurement, for example, like this, your tip is going to push in. But when you grab an outside measurement like this, the tip is going to slide out. It does that so that when you take a measurement like this, but then later you grab the edge of whatever you measured, it's the same measurement. So early in the day, I was taking my measurement against the fence like this, and then checking my blade, but what I was doing was I was pulling my tape measure out like this. Boop. And I spent a lot of time trying to get the saw calibrated so that I could get the cut that I was looking for. And I don't know why, I mean, I know better than that, but this is just one of those brain farts that I've had probably for 2 days. And it dawned on me that all I need to do is push the stupid tape measure against the fence, take my measurement to the blade, and then when I come around after I cut and I pull my outside measurement, it'll be spot on. I don't even know, guys. Anyway, once my head got around that, I got a lot of work done because all I had to do was line up the tape. So it's just one of those little things. Otherwise, it's a lot of fussing to try to get your measurements. And I checked the measurement on every board coming off the saw to make sure it's right. And of course, it's about a 16th over, a 16th over, a 16th over. And I'm like, what is going on? I hate this tape measure. I think it's time to quit, time to have some dinner, get some rest, and not start the joinery on these drawers tonight. I would say this cut sheet probably was pretty good, but man, there was a lot of like rip this, cut that, rip this, cut that, rip this, like you're just chiseling your way through these sheets. So is there a lot of waste? Not really. That's pretty good. We're actually gonna rip some of that down into some of this 2-inch stock that's down here. I didn't rip that stuff today, but some of that will get burnt up for stock. And that big piece was my mistake. That's just me making a boo-boo. So if you subtract out all the 2-inch that comes out of that, I would say in the end, we'll probably have a pile smaller than that from 2 sheets of plywood. Our system of putting tape as we cut the boards and making kind of a game plan seemed to work, especially once you start getting to the point where you're dissecting boards like this. You are going to get so lost so fast. So marking them, even as you maybe rip one section and there's maybe 2 or 3 boards in that board, you've got to mark it unless you have some way to keep track of it. So that worked good for me. And then once I kind of got down to the little pieces, I could really start to work and just cut and make things. What I tried really hard to do was anything that was the similar dimensions, say 3 3/8 or 4 3/8. I tried to cut every single thing that's 4 3/8. That way, even if it's off just a tiny little bit, they're all off a tiny little bit. And so in theory, there's uniformity there. Of course, I'm trying really hard to be super accurate. I think I've learned from doing 2 days of cutting on the Shopsmith that a project like this is about 1 day for one guy to do. And of course, with a little bit of help from Melissa with the initial ripping cuts. So somewhere in there is all the drawers and all the backs for our cabinet set. I'm not even gonna try to do the dadoing tonight, although once it's set up, in theory, we should be able to do everything because it's the same exact setting. So Probably doing that when I'm rested is a better idea because it's such a critical joint. So I think we'll hang it up for tonight, have some dinner, and we'll start putting things together hopefully tomorrow.